Welcome to the Branding Room Only podcast, where we share career stories, strategies, and lessons learned on how industry leaders and influencers have built their personal brands. Now, let's get started with the show. Hi, everyone. It's Paula Edgar, your host of Branding Room Only, where I'm so excited to talk to today's guest. She is Damali Peterman, Esquire, the CEO and founder of Breakthrough ADR, and she's also the author of Negotiating While Black, Be Who You Are to Get What You Want. And I can't wait to hear all about that. A little bit about Damali. She's a professional, lawyer, mediator, negotiator, and author. Personally, she's the oldest of 7, a wife, a mom of 2 boys and dog. And for fun, she's a drummer. She writes greeting cards and she loves Pilates. We're going to hear more about all of that. Damali, welcome to the Branding Room.
It is so wonderful to be here, Paula.
I'm so excited. So for those of you who are not watching us, I was saying to myself, my cheeks are going to be hurting because I keep smiling this whole time. But I'm just so happy. We just saw each other recently, and I'm so happy to be reconnected and talk all about all the things. So we're going to start off with what I ask everybody, which is, what does a personal brand mean to you? How do you define it?
I love this question. And I think as the name implies, a personal brand is something that's personal to each person. So clearly the answer is subjective. To me, the way that I see a personal brand and my personal brand is, what message am I sending out to the world? So that's something that's current at presently, like what am I projecting to the world? 2, how am I evolving my brand? Things change, people change, the world changes. And so how am I evolving my brand and myself? And then 3, I see the brand as being tied to legacy. What legacy do I want to leave in this world? How do I want people to remember me when I'm no longer here? Remember my family, remember my children, remember my words, my books, my cards. Like, how do I want to be remembered?
Legacy is a big word for me. So that resonated. So describe yourself in 3 words or short phrases.
Right. The first word that I have is caring. I think it's hard for me not to be caring. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. You mentioned that in my bio, and I think that says so much about me. So anything that you can think of, I can do work when there's a lot of noise. I know how to make food for 10 people or 1 person. There's no in between. And I'm always thinking about other people. I mean, being the oldest of 7 kids, that's just how I've been programmed. So I would say caring is number 1. Number 2, I think I'm funny. I was thinking about this, like, what way do I want to answer these questions? I could stick with the professional part of it, but I try to make things interesting and fun. I've taken improv at the Upright Citizens Brigade. I really love it because it helps you to think on your feet. And there's so much drama and chaos and conflict, a lot of which I work in on a regular basis, that I'm always looking for something humorous, right? I'm always trying to find something fun to kind of bring the tensions down around me, and also to do something fun, which I think is important just for balance and mental health, right? And then the last word that I'll say to add to caring and fun is curious. I'm very curious. I want to always I consider myself to be a lifelong learner. I'm not afraid to ask questions. I always want to, if I don't know something, I want to know what it means. I want to understand. Today, I learned a term from a social worker. We were talking and she was telling about a conference she went to, and she said that the focus of the conference was social isolation. And I thought that was very interesting. And I wanted to understand more about what that meant. And so I just think I'm a very curious person. So caring, funny, and curious.
Oh, well, I love that. And I love lifelong learning because it is key to iterating and evolving your brand, which kind of brings the 2 things that you said in full circle and connecting. Do you have a favorite quote or mantra that you use to navigate your life?
It changes. I do. It changes. There's so many that I like. I recently saw One Love, the movie about Bob Marley's music and life. And something that, there are many things that stuck with me. I mean, his music, which is over 50 years old, is still relevant and pertinent today, which says a lot, right, about society in general. And so there are a few quotes that came to mind from his music. I think something that sticks in my mind right now is a particular lyric, and it's probably going to sound a bit revolutionary, but it's just been replaying in my mind for
Mhm.
the last 3 days. And in his song War,
Mhm.
he says, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes,
Mhm.
there's going to be war.
Yeah.
And wow, right?
Yeah.
Because it seems like, if you think about it, we're talking about body parts. We're
Mhm.
talking about something that's innocuous that everybody has.
Yeah.
But that simple line and phrase is just powerful because it's still relevant today. We're still talking about race. We're still talking about race relations, diversity, equity, inclusion. We're still
Mhm.
talking about war. There are wars going on right now as we
Yeah.
record this
Yeah.
episode. And so, I wouldn't say that's my favorite quote.
Mhm.
I probably have many quotes, but that just keeps it's just taking up space in my mind because it's like, that's as simple as it could be said and
Mhm.
sung, and it's still a very powerful message and still relevant today.
Oh, first of all, as a half Jamaican and someone who also just saw the movie, I love it. And Bob Marley's his music has been the soundtrack literally of my life. My father played Bob Marley's music over and over and over and over again. And since seeing the movie and the soundtrack coming out again, I've been playing it again. So it really, truly, truly resonates for me, what you said, and particularly the work that we both do in thinking about navigating difference a lot, that there's this underlying thing that when we are navigating bias and all the isms, that there is going to always be conflict, right? Which speaks to a lot of what you do and help people go through. So I love that you picked that as a quote. While not your favorite, definitely relevant and resonates for me. I have been playing Redemption Song over and over and over again. It just sits differently than it did when I was growing up. So I appreciate you going up. So now I guess a good transition. What's your hype song?
This is my hype song. They want to know who's
Who's
that
that girl?
girl? Na 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 na. Dee's that girl. Let me tell you, before every law school exam, I'm a creature of habit, so I always did the same thing.
Yeah.
Don't judge me. I would take for every hour of an exam, I would have one of those Starlight mints, the ones our grandmas had in the purse that
Yeah.
make all the sound when you're in church and you're trying not to get in trouble, but it's like, shh, right? I would have a mint for each hour, and then I would have a banana.
Mm-hmm.
I would have a can of sugar-free Red Bull or Red Bull.
Mm-hmm.
And then in my headphones before every exam, I would play Eve's "Who's That Girl," and that song just gets me hype. And I'm like, I'm about to crush this test. It makes me think about some of Issa Rae's skits, right, where she's talking to herself in the mirror, and it's just pre me knowing about Issa Rae, but I would just sort of do that. And by the way, I think it's hilarious that I actually did the sound effects because I could have said it's Eve's "Who's That Girl," but I kind of went all in for
No,
you
that
just
would not
now.
be
And I've been asked that
authentic.
question before, and I never went all in for people, but I just went all in for you.
You're bringing the authentic Damali experience. And the best part is I heard the first part, I was like, I know what this is. I was like, let's go.
You're getting into it, right? Well, what's interesting is I think people think I'm so serious, which is funny because I have a serious job. I work in conflict like you. I work with people and issues that people have, interpersonal, all these types of things. And so, it requires a certain level of seriousness, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also really I like to have fun and have a good time. And that song to this day, don't get me wrong, like you, my parents played, Bob Marley on record. When I was a child, I was singing. I'm a drummer. I've been percussionist my whole life. But during COVID, I learned how to play I was learning how to play the guitar. And one of the songs that I just can you teach me how to play Redemption Song? So I got the few first chords of it, and which is very exciting. And then I like a lot of music. I love music, right? Especially music that has a good beat. And so you'll hear me listening. I like Fela Kuti, like those 16-minute songs. I might wake up and say, I need to hear Zombie, and it'll play for 5 minutes before he first says anything on the track, but just gets me hyped because I know it's coming and the trumpets start playing. And so for me, it's really about the music and the beat. But for Eve's song, that song makes me feel like I can crush any test or any challenge that comes my way. I love that song.
Well, I mean, I asked this question because I find that my perception, whether I know the person or not, right? We all have, because of bias and all the ways that we learn, et cetera, we make assumptions about people, right? And I love that for like 90% of the time, I can't guess what the song is. And it helps me to have a different flavor of the person. And that's really why I love asking that question. And music is so important to me. Like I got a jam for everything, every moment, every area of my life. I have a song for it. And so I love that. And I also love that you were taking the guitar. So fun fact, I've always wanted to be a drummer.
No way.
Always. My dad was a drummer in high school, and we had a drum set in my basement when we grew up in Brooklyn. And I was like, go in the basement and like try to drum and not know what I was doing. And then I was like, I want to drum. And I was like, well, I'm not going to be great at this. I know. I don't know why I thought that, but I was like, this was like Sheila E. and then it was me. Like, I was like, I'm in between that and it's not going to be as good as that. But then I was like, it's going to be too loud. I've always wanted to do it. It's going to be loud. My friend was like, you could do it on the headphones. I was like, wait, I never thought about that. I was always like, my neighbors are going to try to kill me if I try to play the drums. Anywho, anybody who cares, the one instrument that I played was on the Casio keyboard. I don't know how to play LL Cool J's I Need Love, the first three. Exactly. That's all. That's it. Other than a recorder, I know how to play nothing else. So anywho.
Oh, I see a band in our future.
I'm just saying.
You on keys, me on drums. I see a band in our future.
I'm just going to do spoken word. All right. So tell me this. We've already started talking about it a little bit, but tell me, where did you grow up and how did that shape you?
I am a very proud native of Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in D.C., Northwest D.C., all the way through high school. And that definitely shaped my worldview, living in the nation's capital, being in the epicenter of politics, of government. I was there for both of Marion Barry's mayoral, mayorships or whatever the term is for mayor. So big fan of people, so not just Marion Barry, but we also had a lot of people, Sharon Pratt Kelly, Adrian Finty, and others. And so really always seeing people who look like me in positions of power. Mm-hmm. And I think that was very helpful to sort of see that, you can rise to DC, everyone knows DC is a district, is not a state. Mm-hmm. Our license plates say taxation without representation, right? Mm-hmm. So there was always this interest, this curiosity I had, like trying to understand, what are we talking about? We had Eleanor Holmes Norton as representative in the House for most of my life. And so again, just seeing all these powerful people in DC who look like me made me want more and do more for the communities that I lived in and the communities that I wanted to serve. Mm-hmm. And so growing up in DC was great. I go home as much as I can. I live in New York now, but I'm always, you could take the girl out of DC, but you can't take DC out of the girl. And nothing will make a DC person, by the way, more annoyed than someone being like, I'm from DC too. And you're like, really? Where are you from? And they're like, Bethesda. And you're like, you have a state and a governor, and you have all these things that we don't have. And, or I'm from Arlington. You also have a state and a governor and things that we don't have. So no, but I'm partially joking. I'm partially serious.
No, DC people are very serious about it. Yes. And I'm sure my DMV people are going to be like, first of all, or exactly that.
That's why I'm from Northwest. If you're from DC, you're from Northwest, Northeast, Southeast, Southwest.
That's it. Okay. Well, tell me about your career journey. How did you get to right now? What was your career journey?
Right. So what's interesting about me, I think for most people who are in dispute resolution. A lot of them either started from they were on the bench, so they were in the judiciary as a judge, or they were in law. And I would say, at least most people that I've met are usually litigators, right? So not transactional attorneys. And then they, kind of grow weary of the adversarial process and they want to do more and collaborative problem solving. So they go into mediation. After I finished at Spelman, when I graduated from there, yes, shout out to Spelman, I went to pursue my master's degree in international policy studies in Middlebury out in Monterey, and I focused on conflict resolution. And so I then studied in The Hague, Netherlands. So I actually was a mediator before I went to law school, which is rare. I mean, you are an attorney as well, Paula. How many mediators do you know who were mediators before they started to practice, right?
Not many.
Yeah. So I went into the profession being very keen on problem solving, dispute resolution, conflict de-escalation, having studied different types of disputes globally, including territorial disputes like what we're seeing play out now, including reconciliation tribunals, things of that nature, which we're seeing play out now. And so I've always had this desire to help people resolve conflict more on a policy level, which I think is often overlooked because a lot of these movements, which are great, I'm a fan of, and I think they're definitely a way to draw attention to, you name it, atrocities, terrorism, etc. Change often comes that's lasting, or at least the more durable processes when policies change. So that's why I focused on policy studies. And then I went to law school at Howard University School of Law back in DC. I went back home. And from there, I entered, the legal field, first as a private equity, mergers and acquisitions attorney, then in-house as focusing on contracts and engagement. So what are the terms of our engagement? And I will say, when I started as a private equity M&A lawyer at a big law firm, I started in a down market. So I started, at the firm I worked for, filed the Lehman bankruptcy and several subsequent reorgs and restructurings for various global companies. And so when you start in a down market, similar to things we've seen post-pandemic, then you have to learn a lot of things. You learn what provisions are important to have so that if things go awry, what's being triggered. So I learned about force majeure and how to know how to navigate what people most often think of as boilerplate at the beginning of my career. And so when the market was great again, and then I was able to work on interesting things, leverage buyouts, public and private mergers, et cetera, then I felt like I'd had like a whole history or even a masterclass, if you will, in life cycles of companies. And so when I decided I wanted to start my own company, I felt like I knew what to do. I knew how to build it in a way that would hopefully, we're many years in now, but build it in a way where it would be resilient and it would also help me to help people. I love working at the firm. I love working in-house, but I felt like, and tell me if you ever felt this way, Paula, I felt like I was always being given things to do, right? So essentially, whoever could, afford the services for the companies I worked for were able to get someone like me. Whereas there were a lot of people who were sophisticated and the best at what they did who needed, big law firm experience at boutique law firm prices. So the first company I launched was a law firm, Damali Law. I opened the doors with clients. It was fantastic because it was what I thought the market was looking for, people who could do, what I did at the right price point. And then one of the programs under Damali Law was Breakthrough, essentially the idea for Breakthrough ADR, which focuses on teaching people how to listen, negotiate, and resolve conflict in the workplace and beyond. And so that's, that kind of was my journey from college all the way through starting two companies. And then, of course, I mentioned I'm a mediator. I was able to tap back into my love for dispute resolution and mediation at one of the most prestigious dispute resolution companies in the world. So now I'm a mediator, or the term that we use in our our industry is called a neutral as well.
You know, I never know where all of the symmetry is going to happen, but just in the short amount of time we've been talking. So I took mediation. I was in the mediation clinic when I was in law school.
Yay.
And I remember thinking, because I went to a public interest law school, I was like, what is going to be the most transferable skill that I'll be able to use? And I was like, well, it's not going to be criminal law, although now it might have been. But
Right.
but doing mediation really, really helped me to understand that, the sort of that baseline, getting to yes, understanding that folks, come in with very strong sides, but understanding people's perspective. And that helps me in work that I do, definitely in diversity and inclusion, but also in leadership development and also in thinking about people navigating their brands. All of that is really a negotiation of what you know for sure, and then where you're willing to go in order to move forward, which is, I think, powerful. And as we, at the time of this taping, we are going to approach election season, there'll be that need for having those skills will be so strong because folks don't necessarily, I think I found, don't necessarily know how to agree to disagree, but also agree that folks' opinions and folks' perspectives can be yes and, as opposed to only one or the other. And that is a very powerful thing that I learned, and I was grateful for doing that when I was in law school. Speaking of which, because I am Black, you are Black, we both went to law school, I want to know why you're talking about negotiating while Black in your new book. Tell me about what negotiation sort of looks like generally, and then what are the nuances of negotiating while Black, being who you are to get what you want, which I love the tagline so much. Give me a little bit about what this authorship journey is meant for you and why you wrote this book.
I'm so happy you asked that question. I had this idea in my heart and in my brain for a while. And as I mentioned, sort of my educational professional journey, there were so many times where I had read all the books, I had taken courses at all the top universities, and I still failed to see some, like, to me, pretty basic things reflected in the books. And every time I taught a negotiation course or a mediation course, I found myself supplementing the resources with my own stories, my own mantras, acronyms, my own vocabulary, because the way that I believe that negotiation books have been written primarily and historically over the years is a copy me method, meaning I was successful doing this, and if you do what I did, you too, Paula, will be successful. Well, how does that work if I am a white male, right? And I've written most of the books in negotiation space have been penned by, that's just the statistic, that's just the truth, primarily written by white cisgender men. Right. So what message am I supposed to take from that if the way I show up in the world doesn't check those boxes, and that I know that implicit and explicit bias exists? I've seen it, I've felt it. And so how does one use a toolkit that doesn't fully prepare you to navigate those types of experiences if you show up any other way in the world, right? Which the majority of us show up in a different way. And so, again, I sort of saw myself filling in the gaps that I felt from my own lived experience, from being a negotiator, a cross-border negotiator on transactions globally, on a variety of different issues touching different industries. Because, as you know, Paula, we as lawyers do a lot of work behind the scenes. Right. But the work we do affect, are the clothes people wear, the vehicles you drive, the food and beverages that you consume, the beauty products that you put on. I was negotiating all of those types of transactions, all of those deals across a variety of industries. And there were things that I found missing. And so I started to teach them. I started to write them down. And then I saw some other books come into the space that still didn't, really lean into the fact that the way you negotiate, Paula, me, Damali, and anyone listening, the way you negotiate is going to be unique to you.
Yeah.
So how can I help you fill your toolkit with tools? How can I pull out from you your superpowers to bring them to the forefront? Because the only constant in any negotiation that you're going to be in is you.
Yeah.
So how can we make this transition from a copy me approach to a, this is a negotiation in real life toolkit. I'm going to fill it with you. I'm going to share my experiences, because negotiating while Black, what's interesting about my title is it does a few different things. And by the way, I was adamant that that was going to be the title. You may know that most people have ideas for their book titles. And if they have the privilege of, having their book purchased, which my book went to auction in the US and the UK. And, what that means is 10 bidders came to the table and they said, we think this is a great idea. We want to buy the book. And as a first time author in this scale, that was like a big deal, just like, wow, like you all believe I have a good idea that you want to, bid on it. Yeah. So that told me that whatever I had to say and whatever I was thinking was something that wasn't only relevant to me. Yeah. And one, we want to tell more Black stories. We want to share more Black experiences. And also, we want to tell more stories that are relatable to many people in a multicultural world. And so negotiating while Black to me was a situation where I wanted a provocative title. I wanted the title to reflect my stories as a person who wakes up Black every day, proudly Black every day. And I also wanted people to see themselves in it. So negotiating while whatever box you check, I wanted you to see yourself in it. So all the stories aren't Black stories. You'll see that there's stories of other people from another, whatever box you can think of. I try to cover it. And that's why the subtitle was important. Be who you are to get what you want. One of the questions I have gotten a lot recently from people who aren't Black, can I read your book? Is that book for me? And I love this question so much, Paula. I love it. My book, yes, is for Black readership. Yes. And my book is also for non-Black readership. And that's a paradox. And because people are like, oh, how can those two things both be true? Well, I know people can hold paradoxes. Yeah. I see this in my job every day. Yes. People often say, well, they both can't be true. Well, actually, yes, two things can be true at the same time. And the reason why it's true is because one, and all the negotiating books that I read to date, most of them I didn't feel seen. I felt that I wasn't represented in the text. And I wanted people to feel seen and heard and validated in my book. I also wanted to share some of the stories that I've experienced or learned or worked on with others, because these stories will relate and connect to you if you are a woman, if you are a male, if you are a mother, if you are a student. Like there's something for everyone, because at the end of the day, these are negotiation skills that you can utilize in your personal, professional, private life. And so there's something for everyone. But I really, really, really wanted to make sure that I was telling my story, and my story is how I appear in the world.
I love that. I just got a flashback, because I was thinking to myself, yes, I do think that whenever you sort of narrow a title or a content in any way, folks will think, okay, then that's not for me. But I also always think, well, no one is standing in the bookstore being like, don't you buy that? And there's a power in being able to see and understand some perspectives if you want to be more inclusive as well. But if you want to understand how, because immediately I thought, okay, negotiating my Black ally as a Black person, I'm like, okay, you have to navigate bias. You have to think about the fact that people are going to make perceptions about you. But then you have to think about the magic of Black people and how we show up in these spaces. And there's an authenticity often that's there. There's a lot of, so it's yes and to what we were saying before. And so my recommendation is always put that in your toolkit, right? The little bit more that you know, even if you're not occupying that space. And I often will read across genre because I want to learn, right? To being a lifelong learner is a big deal for me. And it makes you have a broader perspective. And Everybody needs that, especially now. Especially now. So, yeah.
Well, wouldn't you also agree with this,
Mhm.
especially because you occupy the space as
Mhm.
you do so many wonderful things in diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership, et cetera. And step one in allyship is understanding what's happening with the person sitting next to you.
Yeah.
And what blows my mind, I was an English major in college. I love reading still to this day.
Mhm.
And it never would have occurred to me that I couldn't read Pretty Women, or no, not Pretty Women, Little Women, right? Because it had 4 or 5 young white girls on the cover. It would have never occurred to me that I
Mhm.
couldn't read Huckleberry Finn because it
Yeah.
had like it's just mind-boggling to me
Yeah.
that because the word black is written in a book, that
Mhm.
it could give someone the impression that they can't read the book. I think there is a space where people might want to make sure that they're not doing something they're not supposed to do, right? So if they're not
Mhm.
the intended audience, I
Mhm.
understand that question.
Yeah.
And I also think that if a book has women on the title, men
Mhm.
should read it too because they should want to understand. If the
Agree.
book has black in the title, people who aren't black should read it too. If the
Agree.
book has fill in the blanks,
Mhm.
like isn't that the whole point of inclusion and belonging and
Mhm.
and mattering, just
Mhm.
to understand someone else's perspective and lived experience, and to not only be in a homogeneous society where everyone thinks and believes and consumes the exact same thing. Like to me, like part of it is also part of it is like your perception, but
Mhm.
also part of it is like, what is your brand? Getting back to, what
Mhm.
is your brand?
Mhm.
And so I've been very happy to know that a lot of people, not just Black people,
Mhm.
white, Latina, male,
Mhm.
everyone
Yeah.
that's pre-ordered my book.
Mhm.
They're excited to read it, and there is something for everyone. And the
Yeah.
same way I read all these books before, and I continue to read because I want to grow and learn and understand. And you can
Mhm.
oftentimes learn something from one genre or one industry that you can reimagine for
Mhm.
something else. If you think about the way that things work in general, you'll
Yeah.
see people using psychotherapy in negotiation, or
Yes.
psychology in mediation. Or
Mhm.
so there's a lot of ways that the information can be utilized. So I
Oh,
love that you
100%.
said that because it's true. It's
I
true.
mean, it's so true. It speaks to the point of the being who you are to get what you want, right? It's the who you are is not one thing, right? Our intersections are important spaces that we occupy that make us special and lead to what our brand is. And so, what are some of the ways that you have built your personal brand? Tell me what you have done to become the caring, funny, right, person that you are, and having done all the things that you've done. How do you think your brand has shaped from the work that you've done?
That's a great question. What I like to do is I try to
Mhm.
be consistent in
Mhm.
thinking about, what is the message I'm trying to put out there into the world. I
Mhm.
try to think about how I'm trying to leave the place better than it was when I got here. And
Mhm.
so my approach is oftentimes a giving approach, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm so grateful. So many wonderful things have happened in
Mhm.
my life. People have been very generous with their time, their energies, their resources.
Mhm.
And so I often feel that I want to contribute and be a contributor. People, to me, like people who write books don't just write books to see their name in print. There's something
Mhm.
that they want to share with society.
Yep.
And to me, like that's like this calling where, and people do it in different ways, right? People use social media to share information and resources. People use, more traditional routes to share information and resources. They're educators. I love educators because they're every day making the world a better place, providing information and resources. And
Mhm.
so for me, what's been very important is just sort of, thinking about what messages I'm putting out into the world. Am I
Mhm.
contributing to thought leadership? Am I
Mhm.
learning from people around me? I always want to be in conversations where I'm growing and learning. I want to think about the future. I'm
Mhm.
thinking about our children, Polly, our children, and, what they're being exposed to, how they're navigating this new world in a different way than even we did not too long ago. We're not that sure, yeah. And so for me, it's been, my how am I helping the communities that in the spaces that I occupy? How am I advancing women? How am I advancing Black women? How am I advancing, fill in the blank? That's how I continue to grow and to continue to challenge myself. And that's also another part of it. It's like it's a challenge. It's easy to like, okay, I've gotten to this point. That's great. I could just keep, I'd be happy that's just in here. No, well, now I wanted to give back. I want to teach law students. Okay, now I'm teaching law students. That's great. No, now I keep telling people these different things that are working in negotiating, across a variety of different industries in everyday situations, because you said this earlier, everything is a negotiation. Everything is negotiable too. And of course, I know that some things aren't negotiable, but what I mean by that is no isn't always sort of, if you're negotiating a first salary term, for example, and the first answer is no, kind of figure out why they're telling you no, right? Is it that it's not in the budget for this year, but it's open to next year? Is it that there are different ways for you to get to what you want or need? Like, how do you navigate that if you just listen to the no and shut down, right? And so all of these things are important to me because I've been to 49 states. I've been to over 50 countries, and I've interacted with so many people to sort of see that we have a lot more in common, the things that make us different. And so when you ask the question about branding and branding yourself and the message, I try to keep it within that parameter of like, how am I showing up? How am I giving back? And then also remembering that we evolve. Like, I'm a different person now as a mom than I was before I was a mom, right? I'm sure I'm in my mid 40s. I'm different now than I was in my mid 20s, right?
So much better. It's so much better now.
Right. So continuing to sort of evolve and, maintaining that whatever makes you authentically you throughout that evolution. So that's kind of, always in my head as I'm thinking about branding.
Are there some things that come to mind that are specific to the Black toolkit when it comes to negotiating? So are there some things that are like, here are some benefits and here are some challenges that come to mind, like 2 or 3 to wet the whistle of the folks who are going to buy the book?
That's a great question. So interesting. When you say a Black toolkit, something that I think comes up quite a bit is stereotype threat, right? And stereotype threat is when there's a negative stereotype. Usually stereotypes are negative, but they're not always negative, right? Some can be positive. So let's say a negative stereotype, and you don't want to make that ring true. So you're threatened by this negative stereotype. So you try to avoid it. Right. And the way that I've seen that manifest in different spaces is, good example, the angry Black woman, right? And not wanting to come across that way or be perceived as that. So you don't speak up. You don't negotiate. You don't share what you're thinking because you're running up against that stereotype, and there's this stereotype threat there. And so, you may find yourself not advocating for yourself. So one of the tools that I try to highlight is, okay, if you don't feel like you can do it for yourself, or if you are a good negotiator, which I hear a lot from a lot of people, by the way, across every race, ethnicity, gender, age, is, okay, who do you feel comfortable advocating for, right? It might be your younger sibling. It might be your parents that you are providing care for. It might be your fur baby. Maybe you are like, an advocate for whomever. And maybe that, or maybe culturally or based on whatever societal norms in the space you occupy, it may not be appropriate to be, this person. That's why, again, like this toolkit is giving a variety of different tools for different situations for individuals, right? And so I think part of it is understanding stereotype threats, I think part of it might be understanding like trauma and collective trauma and societal trauma. So when, for example, you see certain things on the news and we as Black people might be having a different reaction than everybody else.
Yep.
A situation, for example, with Ralph Yarl, when he went to go pick up his brother and he was shot through the door. And I remember like reading about it, hearing about it, and then having an experience that I didn't even know was going to happen till I was in it, where I was trying to drop my son off to a party. I was unfamiliar with the neighborhood, and I found myself in a space where I wasn't sure which house it was, but I didn't walk to the door, and it's raining. And I'm standing with my youngest son. Rain's coming down, and he's like, Mom, I think it's that one. I'm like, well, I'm not sure. Let me just see if I can figure it out. Let me text the mom. And he's like, Mom, why are we standing here? And it was in that moment that I realized that I was worried, about this situation that happened to this young man and not wanting that to happen to my son and I. And someone might think, well, that doesn't make any sense. But it does, because there's this sort of collective trauma that I think we have when we see, atrocities play out on the news, when we hear these stories, when we know someone that it's happened to, and how that informs like something that might seem like a basic situation, like just going up to someone's house and knocking on the door, how you may have internalized that and not been aware of it. And so another thing that I'll add to the toolkit that I think, and I talk about in my book, that is sort of like how to process these experiences that are happening and protecting your peace, how to take the time that you need to decide what path you want to take, meaning how you want to respond. Because we also don't all have the same responses. And let me be very clear. I say this in the first part of my book, probably in the first 2 or 3 pages. I know that Black is not like a monolith. I know that. I know that. You heard me say, I'm from Washington, D.C. I went to Spelman. I went to Howard University. Love my HBCUs. And of course, I know that. I know that my experience may be different than yours, Paula. We may have many things in common. You mentioned you're half Jamaican. So like you have the Caribbean aspect too. I have friends from all over the world, and we may show up and sit at the table at dinner, all looking the same to everyone looking at us at the table, but we may have all had completely different upbringings and experiences. And I get that. And so that's why part of it is, this is a toolkit for everyone. And if you see yourself in this experience, these are some tools that you can utilize. The last thing I'll say is cognitive reappraisal. I love cognitive reappraisal as another tool for us because it's reframing how you see something. And in my book, I talk about a situation where someone was always being asked to get coffee, and it's a longer story than this. It's a good story. When they were in a work meeting, and it impacted her so much where it was impacting the way she would interact with this other person because they were working together over a long period of time, and and she had to reframe how she saw it because she was negotiating and she wasn't getting some of the terms that she needed because she was so impacted from feeling like she was being asked to do something because, she was a Black woman, for example. And it ended up being, no, you always take such good care of us. Every time we come here, we know that you think about all the things, the big things, the little things. And that's why we love coming to your office because we go other places. So it was like a totally different, their take on it was different. So anyway, cognitive reappraisal, just looking at a situation and reappraising it, reframing it to see it from a different perspective may impact the way you negotiate, the way you communicate, the way that you navigate that situation, which can be utilized with your loved ones, with anyone, right? So that's another tool that I really think is excellent to help not just us, us, but to help everyone who has been in that situation. The other part of my book on the cover is for anyone who's been underestimated or misunderstood. Negotiation. Raise your hands if you've been misunderstood in a conversation or communication. Raise your hands if you've been underestimated underestimated, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, it's very hard to have a book that sits in business
Yeah.
and in personal improvement,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I wrote, a book that sits in two categories,
Mm-hmm.
giving business advice, but also, what used to be called self-help, personal growth and personal improvement.
I love, 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 love all of that. I think that those are such tangible things that last part in particular, cognitive, say it again, cognitive
Reappraisal. So there's
appraisal.
cognitive appraisal and cognitive reappraisal. And I'm dropping some jewels in this
I
book,
love it.
Paul. Like I'm
I
dropping, I
love
mean, 3 years, a lot of research, a lot of, throwing darts, to kind of see what's hitting the target and not. So it was a labor of love.
I can't wait to read it, and I can't wait for everybody else to read it because I do think that having an understanding of how you navigate in the space and having people understand the absolute benefits of being able to know it, like that self-awareness before you go into something. And you said trauma, and immediately I was like, yes, we're all in trauma because we all are navigating still a pandemic that that was a traumatic experience that everybody shared, some lesser than others, but we still shared it. And so I often lead with trying to have that empathy space because you never know where anybody's where their space is just because we've all been through that. But everything else in addition to that is a lot. So I'm glad for that reminder that you gave to all of us. So I want to jump to the fun stuff. So you mentioned drumming, there's some other things, but you mentioned improv. What is some other or more about the fun stuff that you do when you're not navigating heavy negotiating cross-border stuff? What is the things that make your heart joyful?
That's a great question. These days, what makes my heart joyful is traveling. I love traveling. I love learning new things about people, about environment. Going to see the Great Barrier Reef
I'm so
soon.
excited.
Very excited about that. I mean, also because we don't know how much longer it's going to be there, so I think it's important to to
That
check
part.
it out. So traveling, I love spending time with my boys, my kids. They are so fun and so funny. And, kids really do say the darndest things. And you just never know like what they're going to say. And I have to appreciate the fact that I'm raising two negotiators, right? And so like, when they have good negotiation moves, I'm like, ooh, touche. That was good. That's you. Yes, you can have more Fortnite time like that. That was pretty good.
That is hilarious. I would say I don't negotiate with children. I'll make sure he doesn't get to listen to this podcast. I'm like, there's no negotiation. I love that. I love that. So I ask the same two questions to everybody who comes on my podcast. Part one is this. What is the authentic aspect of your personal professional brand that you'll never compromise on? I call it your stand by your brand moment.
So what's interesting about that question is I feel like the word authentic and authenticity is often used when people say things like, I'm just telling the truth, like I'm just, and I don't think that authenticity and telling the truth should negate like tact and should negate thoughtfulness, right?
Yes.
Because there are many ways to tell someone the truth. When I was first dating my husband, I made a vegetable lasagna for the first time ever. I had never made a regular meat lasagna. I don't know what made me think I can make a vegetable lasagna, but you're young, you're in love, you're trying to impress. And I asked him if he liked it. Now, I didn't know that eggplant was all watery. I didn't know all these things. So it was all like soupy. It was not a good look. And I asked him if he liked it. And his answer was, well, it's not my favorite of the things that you've made. Wow, what a thoughtful way to say this was so bad. I wonder if the carry out in DC, we say carry out, I wonder if the carry out's still open that we could go order something to pick something up. But it was thoughtful and I married him. So over the years, like you can be authentic and be thoughtful in what you say, because once you say it, it's out there.
Mm.
And so what I stand by in my brand is I really try to be thoughtful. I really do. And I really want people to be thoughtful, even in your authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
even if you are speaking your truth, just be thoughtful about it because one, we all evolve. And what I find so funny is when the internet's like, oh, remember the one time you said this or did that? You see all the stars, this happens.
Yeah.
Like this
Yeah.
person doesn't have the space or ability to grow and
Mm-hmm.
evolve. Like,
Mm-hmm.
aren't we all doing that? So just be standing by my brand means being thoughtfully authentic.
I think that, and shout out to everybody who's ever been on my podcast because I love you, but that's probably the best answer to this question that I have received thus far because it so aligns with what I feel so deeply because I'm authentic at all times. But I always say there's a scale of authenticity and you have to understand the context in which you're trying to be. Like, there's so much that goes into it. So I love that answer. I remember our general counsel said, authenticity is not keeping it real. And so I wrote it down. I was like, authenticity is not keeping, and it is the how. And so I love, love, love that answer. Okay. Next question is this. Branding room only is a play on standing room only. And so what is that special skill experience about you that folks would be in a room with only standing room only to experience about you and how you show up?
I am a good listener, Paula.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to, not when I'm on a podcast, because on the podcast I'm talking, but I try to listen more than I talk. Mm-hmm. I have always been a person who prefers to listen more than I talk, because when you listen, you learn things. You can hear things that aren't being said, and you can really take in what's happening in the environment around you. And so standing room only, I'm going to be there. I'm going to give you all the body language. I'm going to face you. I'm going to focus on you. I'm going to have my phone away, and I'm going to treat the person who's talking to me like they're the only person in the room and they have my undivided attention. And to me, being a good listener and asking thoughtful questions is how lasting relationships are built, is built on the foundation of trust. And people tend to trust you more when they know that they can be themselves, they can speak uninterrupted and be heard and feel heard by someone else. So standing room only, I'm going to be there. I'm going to listen because I wear many hats, as you said, lawyer, mediator, author, educator. I never know what people, when they're telling me something, what hat they want me to wear, and I don't always assume that it's whatever hat I think I want to wear that day. So listening can help everyone because maybe at that point in time, your significant other just wants to vent. They don't want you to tell them how to fix it. They want to just vent. Mm-hmm. Or maybe someone just wants to get it off their chest, not in a venting way, but they want to get it all out. And then they want you to ask your clarifying questions. Mm-hmm. And so listening, if I can give everyone an assignment who's listening to your amazing podcast, which I'm a big fan of, Paula, and I've been a big fan of yours for a long time, is try an exercise where you listen to someone for, pick a period of time, 4 minutes, 1 minute, 3 minutes, and listen. And don't interrupt them, just listen. And do it with someone who knows you well and do it with someone who doesn't know you well. And you will know if you're a good listener because the person who knows you well might be like, are you there? Are you there? You haven't said anything. Like you'll know if you usually interrupt them. Or you might deal with someone who you don't know well, and they might be like, "Oh, you're a really good listener," So they might give you that feedback that validates that you're doing a good job at listening. So listening, I can't stress enough how important listening is. It's very important.
Listening is key to building your brand because you hear what people are saying about you and to you in a very different way. And so I think that's a perfect way to end the podcast. How can people find you if they want to stay in touch, learn more about you? And of course, we're going to tell them how to buy your book.
I appreciate that. My website where everything is funneled through is www.damalipeterman.com. And I think all of my social media handles are at Damali Peterman.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining me in the branding room. Everybody, run and tell your friend who doesn't listen about this podcast because you know they need to hear it. I'm going to talk to you all soon. Bye.